The midday sun sliced through the towering skyscrapers, shattering into a million fragments on the asphalt below. The city's hum resonated like the roar of a colossal furnace, yet inside Madame Evelyn Lim's car it felt like a serene sanctuary. Plush leather seats enveloped her, and the gentle strains of classical music softly filled the air. Evelyn carefully placed a thermos of freshly cooked Hainanese chicken rice and an assortment of meticulously prepared side dishes on the passenger seat, taking a moment to compose herself. 1, 2, a faint smile touched her lips as her daughter-in-law Sarah Tan's face came to mind. It had only been 3 months since her son Marcus and Sarah had married. Initially, Evelyn felt a pang of resentment at her only son being taken away, but the more she saw of Sarah, her thoughtfulness and endearing nature, the more her heart opened up to her. Sarah, who would readily link arms with Evelyn and softly share details of her day, felt less like a daughter-in-law and more like a daughter. Evelyn was particularly troubled by Sarah, who was growing increasingly thin from constant late nights and work stress. This morning, Evelyn had woken up at dawn determined to prepare Sarah's favorite Hainanese chicken rice and a few other dishes to personally deliver it to her office. 1, 2. Sarah's company was located in a state-of-the-art building in the bustling Central Business District, CBD. 3. Passing through the revolving glass doors, Evelyn was greeted by the cool blast of air conditioning and a lobby with sleek, modern interiors. As she collected a visitor's pass and stepped into the elevator, Evelyn's heart fluttered with a childlike excitement, as if on an outing. It was her first time seeing Sarah at work. She had no doubt that her bright and spirited daughter-in-law would be excelling and well-regarded in her professional environment. Arriving at Sarah's floor, Evelyn saw a vast space divided by numerous partitions and people moving busily. To avoid disturbing Sarah's work, she walked as quietly as possible. Since it wasn't a prearranged visit, she planned to call Sarah from the entrance and ask her to step out for a moment. Just then, a sharp, irritable voice, unmistakably familiar, echoed from deeper within the office. "Miss Sarah Tan, do I look like I'm playing games? Is this a report or a primary school student's doodle? Are you seriously handing this to me for approval?" Evelyn's heart sank. The voice belonged to a middle-aged man, but the name he called out was undeniably her daughter-in-law, Sarah Tan. Unconsciously, Evelyn hid behind a partition and peered towards the source of the commotion. The sight that met her eyes shattered all her expectations. Sarah stood with her head bowed low before a desk that seemed to belong to a team lead. Her slender shoulders trembled imperceptibly, as if they might break at any moment. Standing before her was a pot-bellied, middle-aged man, arms crossed, glaring at Sarah. Mr. Gary Cheung, the team lead. This was the superior Sarah occasionally mentioned with a hint of difficulty. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cheung. I will review and revise it immediately." Sarah's voice was as weak as water-soaked cotton. Gary Chung scoffed, roughly snatching the documents from Sarah's hand and tossing them onto the desk. Papers scattered chaotically. "Revise what? How are you going to revise it? If you're not smart, at least be quick with your hands. What a waste of a pretty face." Gary Chung's voice boomed through the office, yet her colleagues around them seemed to hear nothing, their gazes fixed on their monitors. It was a silent complicity, or perhaps a paralysis born of fear. Evelyn's hands grew cold. Gary Chung rose from his seat and took another step closer to Sarah. He then glanced around and, seemingly convinced that no one was watching, began a more overt display of misconduct. He bent down, pretending to pick up the scattered documents, and then his arm wrapped around Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah, don't be so stiff. You know, it's all because I care about you, right?" His hand slid from her shoulder, slowly moving down her back. Sarah's body stiffened as if bitten by a snake. As Sarah tried to pull away, Gary Chung pulled her closer, whispering into her ear, "How about tonight, just the two of us, a drink, and I'll patiently teach you how to write a report." Special tutoring, eh? The repulsive scent of his breath seemed to brush against Sarah's cheek. Finally, a tear escaped Sarah's eye and fell to the floor. Her daughter-in-law biting her lip and stifling her sobs with her head bowed. The hellish scene where not a single person stepped forward to help her. In that moment, something snapped inside Evelyn. Her initial intention to quietly deliver lunch and leave shattered into 1,000 pieces. Reason drained from Evelyn's eyes, replaced by a cold fire of fury. She stepped out from behind the partition and strode purposefully towards them. The sharp click of her heels broke the silence, echoing piercingly throughout the office. all eyes turned to Evelyn. Gary Cheung, startled by the sudden presence, removed his hand from Sarah. He found himself facing a woman impeccably dressed in expensive attire, exuding an untouchable aura of elegance, yet whose eyes were colder than the Siberian frost. Who are you? How dare you barge into someone else's office? Gary Cheung stammered, flustered. Evelyn, instead of answering, stared intensely into his face. The next instant, Evelyn's hand cut through the air. Smack! A sharp, explosive sound ripped through the office. Gary Cheung's head snapped back violently, and a distinct red handprint bloomed on his cheek. All the employees in the office gasped and rose from their seats. Sarah, her eyes wide and tear-filled, stared at Evelyn as if unable to believe the scene before her. A small whisper escaped her lips. "Madam." Gary Cheung, reeling from the slap, took a few seconds to process what had happened before his face turned scarlet with extreme humiliation and rage. What is this crazy old woman? Who do you think you are hitting people? Are you her mother? Profanities erupted from Gary Cheung's mouth. He clutched his slapped cheek, snarling as if to lunge at Evelyn. But Evelyn didn't bat an eyelid. Instead, she took another step closer and spoke in a voice as cold as ice. "Yes, I am her mother-in-law." It was a short, decisive statement. Evelyn pulled a luxurious business card holder from her handbag. She withdrew a card and almost tossed it at Gary Cheung's chest. "You'll soon learn the consequences of what you've just done and the price you'll have to pay. You will be held accountable for your actions and everything you've done." Gary Cheung picked up the fallen card with a bewildered expression. Still seething with unvented anger, he scoffed at the card as he read it. But the moment the words on the card registered, all color drained from Gary Cheung's face. His eyes began to tremble violently as if an earthquake had struck. The card read Evelyn Lim, Chairman, Evergreen Capital. Gary Cheung's mouth fell open agape. Evergreen Capital. The colossal force that commanded Singapore's financial market 4-5, holding the power of life and death over countless corporations, a ruthless predator. 6. And at its apex, the name Evelyn Lim. In the business world, she was a legendary figure known as the Iron Lady or Corporate Raider. 6. Such a person was the mother-in-law of the junior employee he had just sexually harassed and insulted. Gary Cheung's hands and feet began to tremble uncontrollably. This was no mere mistake. He hadn't just stumbled into a tiger's den. He had provoked the slumbering dragon's lair. His hand holding the business card became slick with sweat, and his legs gave way, almost sending him sprawling. Fear consumed his entire being. It felt like falling into an endless abyss. Evelyn looked down at him with contempt, then firmly grasped the trembling hand of her daughter-in-law, Sarah. This was the beginning of everything. The air in the office was completely dominated by the single business card trembling in Gary Cheung's hand. In the suffocating silence, all the employees stared frozen alternately between Evelyn and Gary Cheung. The sounds of keyboards and ringing phones that had echoed moments ago now felt like they belonged to another world. Only the clear click of Evelyn's heels cut through the stillness. She no longer even glanced at Gary Cheung as if he wasn't worth her attention. Evelyn gently placed an arm around Sarah's stiff, bewildered shoulders. "Darling, you don't need to be here. Let's go." Evelyn's voice, unlike the icy tone she had used with Gary Cheung moments before, was infinitely warm and firm. Sarah finally seemed to regain her senses, looking up at Evelyn's face. It was a complex expression, a mix of tears, shock, and deep regret. The fact that her most humiliating moment had been witnessed entirely by her mother-in-law intensified Sarah's anguish. "Madam, what do I do?" Sarah's voice broke. Evelyn silently shook her head, patting Sarah's back. It was a wordless comfort, an assurance that it would be all right. Evelyn began to gather Sarah's small handbag and personal belongings from her desk. Each of her movements was elegant and unhurried, yet the weight of the anger contained within them was heavy enough to press down on the surrounding air. Watching her, Gary Cheung finally collected himself and stammered, his voice shaking badly with fear. "Chairman, that's a misunderstanding. This is, well," he rambled incoherently. The arrogant demeanor he usually displayed to his subordinates was gone, replaced by a pathetic subservience like a prisoner awaiting a death sentence. Evelyn paused her packing, turning her head slightly to glare at him. The intensity of her gaze made Gary Chung involuntarily step back. Misunderstanding. Are you telling me that what I saw clearly with my own eyes and heard distinctly with my own ears is a misunderstanding? Or are you suggesting that I am old and my sight and hearing are failing me? No, no, madam. Not at all. I was just, Miss. Sarah Tan makes many mistakes in her work, so I was merely trying to offer friendly advice as a senior colleague. Honestly. Gary Chung desperately pleaded his case, but his excuse was like adding fuel to a fire. At the words friendly advice, Evelyn's eyes glinted even colder. Is that how you offer friendly advice? By laying hands on a subordinate without permission and verbally abusing them? Is that the way your company operates? Very impressive. I'll be sure to remember it. Evelyn finished speaking and turned back to Sarah as if Gary Chung was no longer worth her time. She held Sarah's packed belongings in one hand and firmly clasped Sarah's hand in the other. Like a queen, she walked with confident strides towards the office exit. No one dared to block her path. A path opened for them as if by divine intervention. Employees watched their retreating figures with a mix of fear, awe, and a touch of curiosity. All the way down in the elevator, Sarah remained silent. She simply wiped away her tears quietly, her head bowed. Evelyn also maintained her silence, knowing that no words could comfort Sarah now and might even reopen her wounds. In the basement car park, the moment they got into Evelyn's car, Sarah burst into the tears she had held back. Seeing her daughter-in-law sob uncontrollably, her shoulders heaving like a child's, Evelyn's heart ached. She pulled Sarah into her arms and stroked her back. It's all right, darling. Everything will be all right. It's all over now. I'm sorry, madam. I'm so sorry you had to see me like this. Why are you sorry? You did nothing wrong. How hard it must have been for you working under such a despicable man, unable to tell anyone and suffering in silence. My heart breaks for you. Evelyn's sincere comfort made Sarah cry even harder. All the accumulated grief, fear, and powerlessness burst forth at once. Gary Chiang's harassment wasn't just a one-day affair. The subtle verbal harassment had begun shortly after she joined the company, gradually growing bolder over time, and recently even included physical contact. But Sarah couldn't easily resist. It was her first job, one she had worked hard to get, and her parents had high expectations. Most of all, she didn't want to worry Marcus, her husband whom she had just married. She had been enduring all of this alone. After crying for a long time, when her emotions had somewhat settled, Sarah haltingly recounted everything to Evelyn: the forced drinking at company dinners, the lewd jokes during late-night shifts when they were alone, the insidious ways he subtly undermined her in front of others, making her seem incompetent and eroding her self-esteem. As Evelyn listened, her expression grew increasingly stern. Fury surged within her, but she consciously maintained her composure, listening intently to Sarah's story. Please don't tell Marcus. He'll be so upset. I don't want to cause him any more worry. Sarah pleaded pitifully after finishing her story. Evelyn gently wiped Sarah's wet eyes and said firmly, No, Marcus needs to know about this. We are family. They say joy shared is doubled and sorrow shared is halved. I cannot let you bear this pain alone. And this isn't just your problem. This is what happened to my son's wife, my daughter-in-law. This is our problem, darling. Evelyn started the car. On the way home, the atmosphere in the car was heavy. Evelyn's mind was filled with complex thoughts. Beyond her anger at Gary Chung, she felt disgust for the company he belonged to, and the entire organization that had condoned the situation. Simply firing Gary Chung wouldn't be enough. The rotten core deeply embedded needed to be excised completely. This was no mere act of revenge. Evelyn intended to turn this into an act of justice. When they arrived home, Marcus, who had just returned from work, met them at the entrance. Seeing his wife's swollen, tear-streaked face and his mother's icy expression, Marcus instinctively knew something terrible had happened. Sarah, what's wrong, Mother? What happened? Evelyn sat Marcus down on the sofa and calmly but firmly explained everything that had transpired that day. She recounted Sarah's past suffering, the horrific scene in the office, and even her own act of slapping Gary Chung and handing him her business card, leaving nothing out. As he listened, Marcus's face turned pale, then flushed red with uncontrollable rage. He trembled with guilt for being unaware of his wife's ordeal and with a near-murderous hatred for Gary Chung. That beast, I'll go to him right now and make him pay. Marcus sprang up, attempting to rush out. Evelyn firmly gripped her son's arm. Sit down, Marcus. Acting on impulse like that won't help anything. But mother, thinking of what Sarah had to endure, I feel like I'm going crazy. How can you tell me to endure this? I'm not telling you to endure it. I'm telling you to make him pay properly and completely. Evelyn's eyes flashed. Her voice carried strong conviction and cold rationality. Solving things with fists is for amateurs. I will make him pay for his sins in the most agonizing way possible. I will ensure he can never again hold his head high in this company or in society, that his very existence becomes a living hell. All you need to do is stay by Sarah's side and protect her. The rest your mother will handle. Her words carried an undeniable power. In her eyes, Marcus saw not just anger, but the prelude to a grand plan. It was like the omen of a massive storm capable of destroying everything. United under the name of family, the three of them firmly bound together towards a single goal. It was time to open the gates of hell. For Gary Cheung that afternoon was surreal. He felt as if he had been plunged into the middle of a nightmare, his sense of time and reality completely numb. Even after Chairman Evelyn Lim left the office with her daughter-in-law, he remained rooted to the spot for a long time. In his hand, a crumpled business card damp with sweat was held limply. Evelyn Lim, Chairman, Evergreen Capital. Those 6 words seemed to brand themselves into his retina. The murmurs around him pierced his ears. His colleagues' gazes were no longer those of respect or fear. They were filled with ridicule, contempt, and the cruel certainty that he was finished. The world that had been beneath his feet just minutes ago now felt completely inverted. Gary Cheung staggered back to his desk and slumped into his chair. Crazy. This is insane. He swallowed hard, his trembling hands turning on his computer. He typed Evelyn Lim Evergreen Capital into the search bar. The flood of articles and information that filled the screen cruelly crushed his last vestiges of hope. The person known as Singapore's economic powerhouse. 7, 8, a single word from her moved trillions in capital, determining the fate of countless corporations. 6, 9, 10. The Evelyn Lim in the photos wore a cool, elegant smile, but to Gary Cheung it looked like the Grim Reaper's grin. What have I done? Who have I provoked? His mind went blank. Sarah Tan. Just a junior employee from a local university, seemingly without connections or a powerful background. That's why he had treated her so carelessly, viewing her as a toy to flaunt his power. He had even found a twisted pleasure in her tearful, helpless resistance. But she was the daughter-in-law of Evelyn Lim, who commanded Singapore's business world 4-5. This was an unbelievable story, one that belonged in a drama or a movie. Gary Cheung frantically grabbed his phone. He called executives he usually addressed as brother, bank branch managers, and even his University Alumni Association chairman. But the responses to his desperate voice were chillingly cold. The moment Chairman Evelyn Lim's name was mentioned, the other party distanced themselves as if he had a contagious disease. Gary, are you out of your mind? I don't know how you know her, but it's best not to get involved. Don't call me for a while. Click. The call was abruptly cut. These were people who usually fawned over him, eager to please. Gary Cheung, who prided himself on understanding the nature of power better than anyone, now painfully realized how insignificant he was. Before the colossal sun that was Evelyn Lim, he was merely a speck of dust. Fear gripped his heart. This wouldn't be a simple dismissal or disciplinary action. That woman's eyes were filled with the will to destroy everything. His job, his career, his assets, his family. The faces of his wife and children flashed through Gary Cheung's mind. What would their reaction be if they knew? The mortgage payments, the children's tuition fees, the monthly living expenses weighed heavily on his shoulders. Everything felt like it was about to collapse. Just then, the phone on his desk rang shrilly. It was the CEO's secretarial office. His heart plummeted. Mr. Gary Cheung, the CEO, requests your immediate presence in his office. It had come. Gary Cheung wiped his clammy face and stood up. His legs felt weak and he stumbled. The short corridor leading to the CEO's office felt like a path to the execution ground. His colleagues' pitying or perhaps gleeful glances pierced his back like daggers. As he opened the door to the CEO's office, CEO Raymond Chia greeted him with a stern face. CEO Chia stared at the documents on his desk, not even sparing Gary Cheung a glance. Gary, what exactly have you been doing today? CEO Chia's voice was low and calm, but it contained the eye of a typhoon's fury. Gary Cheung felt like falling to his knees. CEO, I'm sorry. I've committed a grave sin, but it's a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding CEO Chia finally looked up at Gary Chong. His eyes were filled with disappointment and contempt. Chairman Evelyn Lim of Evergreen Capital called me directly. She mentioned your name and stated she would hold our entire company accountable. Because of your friendly advice, our company's stock price is plummeting in after-hours trading. Do you honestly think this is something that can be covered up by a misunderstanding? CEO Chia slammed his fist on the desk, shouting. Gary Chung flinched. He despaired at the fact that Evelyn Lim had called the CEO directly. This was a clear declaration of war, showing no intention of a quiet resolution. I will somehow apologize to the chairman. I will personally visit her, get on my knees, and beg. Please, just one more chance, it's too late. CEO Chia cut him off coldly. Chairman Lim has no intention of meeting you or forgiving you. What she wants is not your apology. It's your ruin and the downfall of our company. Gary, you have caused irreparable damage to this company. CEO Chia pulled a document from his drawer and threw it at Gary Chong. It was a notice of temporary suspension, effectively a termination. But Gary Chong instinctively knew this wasn't the end. This was merely the beginning. On his frantic way home from being expelled from the company, Gary Chung's mind was consumed by a single thought. What do I do? He nearly caused an accident driving with unfocused eyes. When he arrived home, his unsuspecting wife greeted him as usual. Darling, you're home early today. What would you like for dinner? The moment he saw his wife's cheerful face, Gary Chung almost burst into tears. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth, feigning illness and secluding himself in his room. Lying on the bed, he stared at the ceiling. Evelyn Lim's cold gaze and Sarah's tears alternated in his mind. Regret, resentment, and a chilling terror pulled him down like a swamp. He didn't know. The fear he was experiencing now was merely the prelude to a much greater tragedy. The predator Evelyn Lim did not kill her prey instantly. She slowly, cruelly, and thoroughly squeezed the life out of them, leaving no room to breathe. His dismissal from work was just a light appetizer. The main course that awaited him in life would be filled with unimaginable agony. Gary Cheung's long night had just begun. The next morning before dawn broke, Evelyn awoke in the pale gloom. Her day always began at this hour. Her bedroom, adorned with a grand chandelier and antique furniture, was quiet, but Evelyn's mind was already bustling with countless strategies and calculation. After tucking Sarah and Marcus into bed last night, she hadn't slept a wink. Instead of being consumed by sorrow and anger, she sharpened them into the coldest, keenest weapons. Evelyn donned a silk robe and went to her study. Beyond the massive bay window, the city's still-sleeping skyline stretched out. She brewed a strong espresso and sat at her desk. On the desk documents about next-gen tech, the company where Gary Chung worked were already laid out. Her executive assistant's office had prepared them overnight. Next-gen Tech, a mid-sized IT company, had steadily grown over recent years but harbored several internal issues. Evelyn scanned the documents, a cold sneer playing on her lips. Financial vulnerability, ethical lapses in management, excessive short-term debt. In her eyes, the company's weak points were glaringly obvious. Gary Chung, the cancerous cell, had found the perfect environment to thrive in such a decaying corporate body. Miss Yoon Evelyn pressed the intercom button on her desk, and a grave male voice immediately responded. Yes, Chairman. I'm ready. Mr. Sung-yoon, her loyal aide, had been by Evelyn's side for over a decade, serving as her right-hand foot and brain. In the business world, he was known as Evelyn Lim's shadow. Is the next-gen tech analysis complete? Yes, Chairman. As you instructed, all preparations are finished. We have analyzed the target company's weaknesses, developed hostile takeover scenarios, estimated costs and success probabilities, and outlined all available funding channels. Excellent. Table it as an urgent agenda item for this morning's board meeting. The goal is singular securing management control of next-gen tech, as swiftly and precisely as possible. We must strike before the market can even react. Understood, Chairman. However, is there a specific reason for such urgency? Next-gen tech wasn't on our primary target list for this year. Yoon's cautious question made Evelyn briefly turn her gaze towards the window. In the slowly brightening dawn, her eyes glinted coldly. A personal reason has emerged. A very important one. 3. Evelyn's voice was devoid of emotion, yet Mr. Yoon could discern the terrifying fury simmering within it. He asked no further questions. He knew well from countless past cases how brutal and thorough corporate raids became when Chairman Evelyn Lim's personal reasons were involved. Effective today, all our company's resources will focus on the next-gen tech acquisition. The finance team, legal team, and PR team will all shift to emergency operations. Maintain strict confidentiality so our moves aren't detected by the media, and quietly accumulate shares under the radar. And thoroughly investigate everything about that team leader at Next Gen Tech, Gary Chong. Tax evasion, embezzlement, breach of trust, extramarital affairs. If even a speck of dust comes out, be prepared to turn it into a typhoon. Remember that. The brief call ended and Evelyn picked up her coffee cup. The chessboard was now perfectly set. Gary Chung was merely a pawn, a bait placed at the starting point. Evelyn's true target was not just the pawn, but the king. It failed to protect Next Gen Tech's incompetent management and its entire corrupt system. She aimed not merely to punish an individual, but to dismantle and reconstruct the entire rotten organization, making them pay the price for the irreparable wound inflicted upon her daughter-in-law. At 9 a.m., an emergency board meeting was convened in the heart of Evergreen Capital's headquarters. A palpable tension filled the air as Evelyn entered the boardroom. She presided over the meeting with her usual impassive expression. Today's urgent agenda item is the acquisition of Next Gen Tech. Evelyn's declaration brought a ripple of surprise across the executives' faces. Yet no one raised an objection. Evelyn Lim's decision was law, and they were merely her elite force tasked with finding the most efficient execution plan. Mr. Yoon began his briefing, outlining the rationale and strategy for the next-gen tech acquisition based on the prepared documents. At that very moment, under Evelyn's direction, Evergreen Capital's wolves began to move. Through dozens of nominee accounts, next-gen tech's shares were quietly being accumulated on the stock market. 8. With only a slight increase in trading volume, the market remained oblivious. Simultaneously, the legal team delved into Next-Gen Tech's articles of association and board structure, analyzing weaknesses for a potential management dispute scenario, while a separate intelligence team began their background check on Gary Cheong. Evelyn oversaw and directed this entire process from her office, receiving real-time reports. A large monitor before her displayed all the information Next-Gen Tech's stock fluctuations, relevant news, and real-time share acquisition status in a clear, organized manner. Like a general commanding a battlefield, she controlled the operation with flawless precision. For Evelyn, this was no mere corporate acquisition. This was war, a ruthless retribution against those who had dared to harm her precious family. She intended to make Gary Chung and Next-Gen Tech realize how naive their initial fear had been upon hearing her name. The real hell had not yet begun. On the Queen's chessboard, the pieces began to move according to her will. Checkmate would not take long. For Gary Cheong, the temporary suspension was tantamount to a death sentence. Without a workplace to report to, he was confined to the narrow space of his home, battling the anxiety that tightened its grip with each passing moment. He lied to his wife, telling her he was on temporary remote work for an important company project, but his pale face and nervous demeanor were enough to arouse her suspicion. "Darling, are you really all right? You don't look well. I told you I'm fine. Just a little tired." He tried to act normal, but he flinched whenever his phone rang and spent sleepless nights plagued by nightmares. Obsessed with the idea of contacting Chairman Evelyn Lim to apologize, he made dozens of calls to Evergreen Capital's secretarial office only to be met with the cold reply. The chairman has no intention of speaking with external parties. He felt powerless like an ant before a colossal fortress. His anxiety slowly began to eat away at his life, becoming a harsh reality. The first sign came with a call from the bank. "Mr. Gary Cheong, we are calling regarding your upcoming home loan renewal. Based on our internal review, we regret to inform you that your loan renewal has been denied. The full principal amount is due for repayment within 1 month." Gary Cheong couldn't believe his ears. He had always been a prime customer, never missing a payment. A sudden denial of his loan renewal was unthinkable. "What? What do you mean? Is there an issue with my credit? We cannot disclose the details of the review. We ask for your understanding. If the full repayment is not made within the stipulated period, foreclosure proceedings will be initiated on your property." The call ended abruptly. Gary Cheong was in a panic. How could he possibly raise hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single month? He inquired at other banks, but the results were the same. Every financial institution, as if by prior agreement, had turned its back on him. An invisible hand was meticulously cutting off his financial lifelines. Evelyn Lim. Her name surfaced, sending a shiver down his spine. 5. His misfortunes did not end there. A few days later, a tax audit notice arrived from the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore, IRAS. 11/12. It stated that a thorough investigation of all his income and expenditures over the past few years would be conducted. Gary Cheong had frequently used cash to evade taxes and had often used his corporate credit card for personal expenses. These past actions, which he had carelessly dismissed as minor issues, now loomed as sharp blades at his throat. This is clearly a targeted investigation. He cried foul, but no one listened. Everything around him was becoming a tightening noose. His once friendly colleagues began to avoid his calls, and his name quietly disappeared from various social gatherings he belonged to. He was instantly isolated. Subtle changes were also detected within Next Gen Tech. The company atmosphere had been unsettled since Gary Cheong's suspension. Then one day, several of the company's major clients suddenly notified them of contract terminations. Partnerships that had spanned years were severed without warning. With a severe blow to revenue, anticipated CEO Raymond Chia and the management team were thrown into crisis mode. What is the reason? Why are they suddenly cutting ties with us? CEO Chia personally visited the client company's representatives, pleading with them, but received only vague answers. Mr. Chia, we apologize, but this decision came from above. There's nothing we can do. We've assessed that continuing our business with Next Gen Tech carries too much risk. The word risk resonated in CEO Chia's mind. He instinctively knew that Evelyn Lim of Evergreen Capital was behind this. She had chosen a method of slowly strangling Next Gen Tech's periphery rather than a direct attack. A cruel and clever strategy to sever the main arteries one by one, ultimately bringing the heart to a halt. To make matters worse, strange rumors began to circulate in the stock market. Whispers about Next Gen Tech's financial health being worse than imagined, rumors of a mass exodus of key technical talent, and impending major negative news spread like wildfire. 8. Naturally, the stock price plummeted. In just a few days, a quarter of its market capitalization evaporated. The office atmosphere became unbearable. Employees, gripped by the fear that the company might collapse at any moment, couldn't focus on their work and murmured suspiciously amongst themselves. What began with one man, Gary Cheong, was now escalating into a colossal disaster, threatening the very survival of the entire company. Voices of resentment against Gary Cheong began to emerge. Even employees who initially sympathized with him or viewed it as someone else's problem now pointed fingers at him as the cause of the company's ruin, condemning him. As the full story of his sexual harassment incident spread through anonymous online forums, public opinion worsened further. Gary Cheong spent his days holed up at home, searching his name and the company's name online. He trembled with helplessness as he read the curses and accusations directed at him. He now realized that Evelyn Lim had never intended to receive an apology from him. What she desired was his complete social annihilation. An invisible, colossal noose was tightening not only around his neck, but around everything he was connected to. He couldn't breathe. The more he struggled, the tighter the noose became. Gary Cheong was finally overwhelmed by the urge to give up everything. But Evelyn Lim had no intention of allowing him such an easy escape, such as ending his own life. The real suffering was only just beginning. This was merely a quiet prelude to a grand symphony of destruction. The invisible noose began to choke the entire empire of Next Gen Tech. The stock price crash and client defections were just the beginning. Under Evelyn Lim's command, Evergreen Capital meticulously targeted Next Gen Tech's weakest points, much like a skilled surgeon excising cancerous cells. First, a psychological war was launched through the media. Evergreen Capital's PR team did not directly intervene. Instead, they discreetly leaked allegations of Next Gen Tech's internal corruption to economic journalists and influential stock market YouTubers. They managed framing it as unconfirmed information. According to legal circles, there are allegations that mid-sized IT company Next Gen Tech's management has been inflating its performance through accounting fraud for several years. 13. Furthermore, intelligence suggests that billions in slush funds have been created by funneling work to shell companies operated by the CEO's relatives. Initially, these were small news snippets, but day after day, articles with increasingly provocative headlines began to dominate the economic sections of online portals. Next-gen tech, a morale hazard crisis, a graveyard for retail investors. What's happening at the falling next-gen tech? The articles cleverly blended facts with speculation, pushing investors' anxieties to an extreme. The results were immediate. Next-gen tech's stock price hit rock bottom, daily becoming worthless paper. Terrified individual investors began a selling spree, cutting their losses, and even institutional investors turned their backs. CEO Raymond Chia held emergency press conferences daily, vehemently declaring all allegations baseless and threatening legal action, but it was futile to restore market confidence once lost. His explanations only fueled the allegations further. The internal cracks deepened. As the company faced crisis, the suppressed grievances of employees began to erupt, especially among young employees who had suffered under the bullying and injustice of superiors. Like Gary Chung, whistleblower reports flooded anonymous forums and online communities. The Gary Chung incident is just the tip of the iceberg. Many of our company's executives routinely forced female employees to entertain at drinking sessions and made sexually suggestive remarks. A culture of executives taking credit for project achievements and pushing responsibility onto working-level staff is rampant. This is not a proper company. Gary Chung's sexual harassment incident became a symbol of the rotten corporate culture, igniting a firestorm of criticism against next-gen tech as a whole. Employees no longer dedicated themselves to the company. Key developers and talented personnel began to secretly move to rival companies, and remaining employees merely awaited an opportunity to jump ship from the sinking vessel. The collapse of the organization was swift. CEO Raymond Chia was at his wits' end. He frantically scurried to manage the problems erupting from all sides, but the situation only worsened. Banks refused additional loans, and the Monetary Authority of Singapore MAS launched a special audit into the accounting fraud allegations. 15. Next-gen tech, once considered a solid, mid-sized enterprise, plummeted into a failing company on the verge of bankruptcy in less than a month. Amidst all this chaos, Evergreen Capital moved quietly like a phantom in the mist. They steadily bought up next-gen tech's plummeting shares at bargain prices. Finally, the moment their stake exceeded 5%, Evergreen Capital publicly revealed its presence in the market through an official disclosure. Evergreen Capital acquires 5.1% stake in next-gen tech for simple investment purposes. Simple investment, but no one in the market truly believed that. This was a signal announcing the full-scale entry of the corporate raider Evelyn Lim. As soon as the disclosure went out, next-gen tech's stock price actually surged. This was due to the expectation that Evergreen Capital would intervene in management and normalize the company. For CEO Raymond Chia and the current management, this market reaction was nothing short of a death sentence. The CEO laughed hollowly in his office. Evelyn Lim's strategy was terrifyingly perfect. Drive the company's value to rock bottom, acquire shares at the cheapest price, and then emerge as a white knight lauded by the market. She was systematically stripping next-gen tech bare, exposing all its flaws before devouring it in the most humiliating way. And finally, the decisive blow arrived. Evergreen Capital sent an official letter to next-gen tech. The letter alleged severe moral failings and management incompetence on the part of the current leadership, causing significant damage to shareholder value. It demanded an extraordinary general meeting to dismiss all current management and appoint Evergreen Capital's nominees to the board. This was an undeniable declaration of a hostile takeover, a coup d'état of management control. CEO Raymond Chia's hands trembled as he held the letter. He had to decide whether to surrender unconditionally or make one last stand, but there seemed to be no way to overturn the already tilted scales. His supportive allies were woefully insufficient, and the minority shareholders had all sided with Evelyn Lim. The empire was collapsing. Meanwhile, Gary Chung, who had been observing this entire process from his home, was gripped by a sense of emptiness beyond mere fear. He couldn't believe that an entire company was on the verge of disappearing because of him. He felt like a villain in a grand historical drama rather than a mere individual's ruin. And he still didn't know that his role in this grand drama was not yet over. Evelyn Lim had planned to pull him back onto the stage at the most crucial moment in the most brutal way. Leading up to the extraordinary general meeting, Next Gen Tech was in a state of utter turmoil. CEO Raymond Chia and the current management fought desperately to defend their control. Through the media, they painted Evergreen Capital as a ruthless corporate raider, uncaring about shareholder interests, and even attempted to lobby some politicians for help. But the tide had already turned. Public opinion and the market were firmly on Evelyn Lim's side. Meanwhile, a quiet family meeting was held in Evelyn's living room. It was after Evelyn, Marcus, and Sarah had finished dinner. The TV news continuously reported on Next Gen Tech's management dispute. Watching CEO Raymond Chia looking haggard criticizing Evergreen Capital on screen, Sarah's expression was complex. "Madam, I'm worried you've gone to too much trouble because of me." As her personal issue escalated into a massive event, shaking the fate of an entire company, Sarah felt a mix of guilt and burden. Evelyn gently held her daughter-in-law's hand and spoke softly. "Darling, this isn't because of you. A festering wound is bound to burst eventually. What you experienced merely became the catalyst that brought the festering wound to our attention. And actually," Evelyn paused, looking at Marcus and Sarah in turn. What she said next was enough to surprise them both. Next Gen Tech was already on Evergreen Capital's acquisition list long before you experienced this. Marcus and Sarah's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Mother Marcus asked again. Evelyn calmly continued her explanation. "Our company annually analyzes potential merger and acquisition targets and manages a list of them. Next Gen Tech had good technology but was undervalued due to inefficient management and an unstable financial structure. It was an excellent target. We could achieve high returns by restructuring it and installing professional management. We had already completed a detailed analysis of Next Gen Tech months ago and were just waiting for the opportune moment." This was the first twist. Evelyn's attack on Next Gen Tech was not an emotional act of revenge for her daughter-in-law. It was a meticulously planned hunt long in the making, and Sarah's incident had merely provided the perfect justification and catalyst for the hunt. Her anger was real, but the way she expressed it was a coldly calculated business strategy. "So even if it wasn't for me, it would have happened eventually." Sarah trailed off. "Yes, we would have made our move eventually. Thanks to you, however, the timing was accelerated and we gained a much stronger moral justification for our actions. So, darling, you have absolutely no need to feel guilty. In fact, you are our top contributor for providing us with this decisive opportunity." With Evelyn's explanation, Marcus and Sarah finally felt all the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. A formidable figure like Evelyn Lim would not act solely out of personal vengeance. Every one of her actions was underpinned by thorough calculation and strategy. This realization significantly alleviated the burden weighing on Sarah's heart. At the same time, her reverence for her mother-in-law Evelyn Lim deepened further. Marcus let out a short laugh. "As expected of you, Mother. So that CEO Raymond Chia was just playing in your palm, wasn't he? Without even knowing why he was being attacked." "Probably. He's probably still feeling wronged, thinking I'm going this far simply over one employee, Gary Cheung. But the real reason is entirely different. Thanks to that, he's crumbling helplessly, unable to even mount a proper defense." Evelyn was right. CEO Raymond Chia had completely misjudged Evelyn's intentions. He believed she was overreacting due to personal emotions and that public opinion would eventually turn in his favor. But his opponent was the top corporate raider in Singapore, armed not with emotion, but with sharp data and strategy. It was a battle that was never meant to be a fair fight. Through this conversation, Sarah realized she was no longer a helpless victim. Unbeknownst to her, she had become an important part of this grand scheme of retribution, standing at the center of a process to bring about justice. Her eyes hardened, becoming even more resolute than before. A few days later, the extraordinary general meeting was finally held. The venue was packed with reporters and shareholders. CEO Raymond Chia made a last-ditch effort to persuade shareholders and defend his management control, but the outcome was as everyone expected. The motion to dismiss all current management was overwhelmingly passed, and new directors recommended by Evergreen Capital were appointed shortly thereafter. Raymond Chia stepped down from the chairman's seat with a look of utter defeat. It was the moment his empire built over decades crumbled to dust. Amidst the flashing cameras of reporters, he met Evelyn Lim's cold gaze from the stage. In that instant, Raymond Chia realized that this might not have been a mere management dispute. In Evelyn Lim's eyes, there seemed to be something else, a much deeper and older emotion beyond the calm assurance of a victor. But he couldn't decipher what it was. Next Gen Tech was now completely in Evelyn Lim's hands. People thought this was the end of everything. They expected a happy ending with the villain ousted and a new owner normalizing the company. But for Evelyn Lim, this was only half the story. Her true prey lay elsewhere. CEO Raymond Chia, like Gary Cheong, was merely bait for a larger game. The real target of Evelyn's revenge and its underlying reason were still deeply hidden within the second yet-to-be-revealed twist of the story. Her true war was only just beginning. Evelyn Lim's first move after fully seizing control of Next Gen Tech was unconventional. Instead of deploying Evergreen Capital's own personnel, she recruited a highly capable and reputable professional CEO known for his integrity in the industry and appointed him as the new chief executive. She granted the new CEO full authority, tasking him first and foremost with organizational culture, innovation, and the eradication of past corruption. The new management's first target naturally was personnel issues. Gary Cheung was not only officially dismissed but also faced a civil lawsuit for the substantial damages he caused the company. Intermediate managers, including him who had previously bullied employees or been involved in sexual harassment, were also either fired or referred to disciplinary committees. His colleagues who had silently condoned his actions under his protection were not spared either. The company rapidly moved towards normalization. With Evergreen Capital's substantial financial support and the new management's innovative leadership, Next Gen Tech seemed to shed its past tarnished image and be reborn. Stock prices stabilized and former clients returned. Everything appeared to be resolving smoothly. But Evelyn was not yet satisfied. Her gaze remained fixed on Raymond Chia, who had been ousted from Next Gen Tech. Evelyn was tracking Raymond Chia's every move through Mr. Yoon, his assets, his connections, his past activities. Like a relentless hunter, Evelyn had no intention of stopping until Raymond Chia's breath was completely cut off. Marcus found his mother's actions somewhat puzzling. "Mother, you've taken over Next Gen Tech, and people like Gary Cheong and Raymond Chia have been removed. Can't you just let Mr. Chia go?" Evelyn looked down at a complex relationship chart in her study and said softly, "Marcus, when you catch a snake, are you satisfied with just cutting off its tail, or do you crush its head to ensure it can never spew venom again?" Raymond Chia is not just a former CEO of Next Gen Tech. He is someone I have been watching for a very long time. Next Gen Tech was merely a shell he briefly inhabited. What I truly want to destroy is Raymond Chia himself and the corrupt cartel he belongs to. Evelyn's eyes held a deep-seated hatred that transcended mere anger. The roots of that hatred connected to a distant past that even Marcus was unaware of. Meanwhile, Raymond Chia, who had lost everything, was spending his days in despair. Everything he had built over decades had vanished like a bubble. He couldn't sleep, consumed by a sense of injustice and rage. He believed Evelyn Lim had attacked him, merely out of greed for Next Gen Tech, or using the Gary Cheong incident as an excuse. This made it even harder for him to comprehend. There was no reason for her to be so ruthless just to acquire a mid-sized company. Then one day, an unexpected individual contacted Raymond Chia. He was a lawyer from the legal team of Summit Holdings, a leading conglomerate in Singapore. 6, 9, 10, Mr. Raymond Chia, I have something to discuss with you. Our chairman wishes to meet you. Raymond Chia was puzzled. Summit Holdings was a colossal business empire, far beyond Next Gen Tech in scale. Why would they want to meet him? Clinging to any straw of hope, Raymond Chia went to the appointed meeting place. Waiting for him was Mr. Richard Ong, the chairman of Summit Holdings, a formidable figure wielding immense influence in the business world. "Mr. Chia, I heard you're in a difficult situation. Evelyn Lim of Evergreen Capital is a truly fearsome woman," Mr. Ong said with a significant smile. "Mr. Chairman, what can I do for you, Mr. Chia? You're not the only one who has suffered at Evelyn Lim's hands. I too have had many headaches because of her. They say the enemy of my enemy is my friend, don't they? I contacted you because I believe I can help you." Mr. Ong offered Raymond Chia an enticing proposal. He suggested using Summit Holdings' financial resources and legal team to prepare a counterattack against Evelyn Lim. The plan was to file a lawsuit alleging that Evergreen Capital had illegally manipulated stock prices and swayed public opinion to wrongfully seize management control. They would also dig into Evelyn Lim's personal wrongdoings and leak them to the media. For Raymond Chia, who was steeped in despair, this offer was like a lifeline. How can I trust you, Mr. Chairman? Whether you trust me or not is your choice, Mr. Chia. But will you just sit by and let everything be taken from you? Or will you try to inflict a wound on that woman's face one last time? Raymond Chia's eyes wavered. He eventually took Mr. Ong's hand. Consumed by a desire for revenge, he failed to see the true intentions hidden behind Mr. Ong's sweet offer. This entire situation was being reported to Evelyn Lim in real time. A cold smile spread across Evelyn's lips as she listened to Mr. Yoon's report. Just as expected, Raymond Chia took the bait, and finally the real rat hiding behind him has poked its head out of the hole. Mr. Yoon cautiously asked Chairman, was Mr. Richard Ong of Summit Holdings our true target? Yes. Raymond Chia was merely a puppet and a shield for Richard Ong, the mastermind behind the slush funds created through next-gen tech and the illegal lobbying is Richard Ong himself. Raymond Chia was just a minion cleaning up after him and taking the crumbs. This was the deeper truth hidden within the story. Evelyn Lim's real target was not Raymond Chia, but Mr. Richard Ong, chairman of Summit Holdings, a colossal force of evil controlling Singapore's business world. 6-9-10. Gary Chung's sexual harassment incident was merely the small flutter of a butterfly's wings that triggered a butterfly effect in this grand scheme of revenge. Evelyn stood up and looked out the window. Richard Ong, this long-standing bad blood with him must end now. I must make him pay dearly for my husband's life, mustn't I? Evelyn's voice trembled with a chilling intensity. In her eyes, there was not just cold business calculation, but deep-seated resentment and sorrow that transcended mere anger. Her past unknown to anyone, and the terrible enmity with Richard Ong, the prelude to the second twist, was finally beginning to reveal itself. While Evelyn Lim was orchestrating, her grand revenge changes were also unfolding for Sarah, the starting point of the incident. For the first few days, she was afraid to even leave the house due to the traumatic memories and shock. However, with her husband Marcus's devoted comfort and her mother-in-law Evelyn's unwavering support, Sarah slowly regained her peace of mind. Notably, Evelyn did not treat Sarah merely as a vulnerable victim to be protected. Instead, she respected her as the most important party in the incident and listened intently to her voice. Darling, what you experienced was never your fault, so there's no need to hide or feel ashamed. On the contrary, you must face it head-on. Evelyn called in her legal team's lawyers to her home and had them meticulously explain to Sarah how she could protect herself and assert her rights during the upcoming lawsuit against Gary Cheong. Initially, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the mere presence of lawyers, but as she received help and sincere legal advice from professionals who genuinely supported her, she gradually found her courage. The biggest change began when Evelyn showed Sarah Next-Gen Tech's internal documents. Evelyn laid out internal audit reports and personnel records from Next-Gen Tech, which she had acquired during the takeover process before Sarah. Look at this, darling. These are the performance reviews Gary Chong gave you since you joined the company. The documents were filled with negative evaluations of Sarah's work performance and baseless accusations. Gary Cheong had cleverly sabotaged Sarah's achievements and lowered her evaluations, making her appear incompetent and problematic. This was a form of gaslighting. Sarah had blamed herself, thinking she was truly inadequate, but through these objective records, she realized it had all been Gary Cheong's malicious harassment. And these are the records of other female employees who were in Gary Cheong's team before you and subsequently resigned. The other documents Evelyn showed contained startling facts. Over the past few years, Gary Cheong's team had an unusually high turnover rate of young female employees. Most of them left the company within a year of joining. Circumstantially, it was highly likely they had suffered similar harassment to Sarah. They, unlike you, chose not to speak up and simply left quietly. And that silence allowed monsters like Gary Cheong to continue. Evelyn's words profoundly shocked Sarah. At the same time, she felt a deep sense of solidarity and responsibility. This issue was not just hers alone. She felt that for the sake of other victims who had suffered and those who might suffer in the future, she could not stop here. From that day on, Sarah's eyes changed. She was no longer a victim lost in sorrow. She became a warrior, determined to confront her wounds and fight against injustice. Sarah, with the help of the lawyers, actively began preparing her lawsuit against Gary Chang. She decided to hold him accountable for not only sexual harassment, but also workplace bullying and defamation. She no longer feared bravely and logically articulating every incident she had experienced. Furthermore, using the documents Evelyn provided, she began to track down other former female employees who had resigned. Initially, they avoided contact or were reluctant to testify, but as Sarah sincerely shared her own experiences and persuaded them, a few began to open up. They courageously agreed to participate as witnesses in Sarah's lawsuit or to provide written statements about their experiences. Her lonely fight was now transforming into a collective struggle. Evelyn and Marcus were the happiest to witness Sarah's transformation. Marcus was deeply moved and proud to see his wife overcome her trauma and stand on her own 2 feet. "Sarah, you are truly amazing. I'll be by your side until the very end." Evelyn also felt proud to see her daughter-in-law realize her own worth and strength. Beyond legal support, Evelyn wanted to help Sarah build a new life for herself. "Darling, you have grown incredibly strong through this experience. Your strength and experience can bring great comfort and courage to others who have suffered similar pain." Evelyn introduced Sarah to women's advocacy groups and victim support centers she sponsored. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. There, Sarah received professional psychological counseling to heal her wounds, and at the same time, she contemplated her role by learning about the cases of other victims. A new goal emerged to contribute to changing systemic issues in society beyond just personal revenge. For Gary Chang, this was the worst-case scenario. He had expected Sarah to quietly accept a settlement and withdraw, but the situation had taken a completely opposite turn. Sarah flatly refused any settlement, and with past victims coming forward as witnesses, his crimes snowballed. The media constantly reported on his misconduct under headlines like "Former Next Gen Tech Team Leads Disgraceful Bullying Revealed." He had become synonymous with the most shameless workplace bully in Singapore. The victims were no longer silent. Sarah's counterattack, though, on a different scale than Evelyn Lim's grand revenge, was creating an equally powerful ripple effect. She was transforming her own wounds into a beacon of strength, illuminating others suffering in darkness. No one yet knew that these small beacons would eventually coalesce into a colossal torch, driving away the vast darkness. Backed by the support of Summit Holdings, Chairman Richard Ong Raymond Chia launched his full-scale counterattack. He appointed a legal team from Raja and Tan, one of Singapore's top law firms, 21, 22, 23, 24, and filed a lawsuit against Evergreen Capital to nullify the resolutions of the shareholder meeting. His claim was that Evergreen Capital had spread false information to manipulate stock prices and unduly influenced shareholders' decisions to illegally seize management control. Simultaneously, media outlets directed by Mr. Ong began to publish negative articles targeting Evelyn Lim. They portrayed her as a greedy corporate raider who preyed on retail investors, dredging up past M&A cases conducted by Evergreen Capital to criticize her aggressive management style. They even fabricated and spread malicious rumors about her private life. The business world watched the clash of these two giants with keen interest. Evelyn Lim, the rising financial powerhouse, and Richard Ong, the head of a traditional conglomerate. It seemed like a David and Goliath battle, but those who knew Evelyn Lim's formidable capabilities were hesitant to predict the outcome. However, Evelyn remained entirely unfazed by Summit Holdings' offensive. Instead, she prepared her next steps calmly and meticulously, as if she had anticipated this entire situation. Richard Ong's use of Raymond Chia to initiate legal battles and media campaigns was already part of her scenario. The more noise they make, the better. While everyone's attention is focused on them, we can quietly aim for their heart. Evelyn asked Mr. Yoon for an update on the covert operation. "Are the preparations complete?" "Yes, Chairman. We have traced all illegal money flows between Chairman Richard Ong and Next Gen Tech. We've secured all evidence, including stock manipulation using Next Gen Tech's internal information through nominee shell companies and details of slush funds siphoned into offshore tax havens." Mr. Yoon's team had analyzed all of Next Gen Tech's accounting records and computer servers immediately after the acquisition. And finally, they had unearthed decisive evidence of all the illegal activities Raymond Chia had committed under Richard Ong's instructions. This was a nuclear bomb with immense destructive power capable of shaking Summit Holdings to its core. Good. But it's not time to detonate it yet. We must detonate it in the most painful way when they are most complacent. Before that, let's send Richard Ong a small gift. Under Evelyn's direction, Evergreen Capital's legal team submitted a rebuttal to the lawsuit filed by Raymond Chia. However, the submitted documents contained an unexpected revelation. It included concrete evidence of Raymond Chia's embezzlement of massive company funds and breach of trust during his tenure as Next-Gen Tech's CEO. This was an attack that caught Richard Ong and Raymond Chia off guard. They had expected Evergreen Capital to merely defend against the management dispute itself, but Evelyn had completely changed the game, exposing Raymond Chia's personal corruption. As soon as these documents were made public, public opinion instantly turned. Raymond Chia, who had claimed his management control was unfairly seized, became a despicable criminal who had siphoned off company funds overnight. Even the sincerity of his lawsuit came under question. Richard Ong was enraged. He was flustered by Evelyn Lim's unexpected counterattack, and his puppet Raymond Chia had instantly become useless. He immediately instructed his legal team to sever ties with Raymond Chia and withdraw from the lawsuit. It was a classic case of cutting off the tail. Raymond Chia abandoned, despaired. There was no one left to help him. He faced a criminal investigation by the Public Prosecutor's Office, similar to Singapore's Attorney General's chambers, and the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau for certain cases. 13, 25, and a travel ban was immediately imposed. Having lost everything and fallen into the status of a criminal, he finally realized he had been merely a pawn in a larger game. And he harbored intense hatred for both Evelyn Lim and Richard Ong, who had brought him to this state. Evelyn Lim, as if rolling a small stone to bring down a mountain, used Raymond Chia as that stone to create the first crack in the colossal mountain that was Richard Ong. Now, Richard Ong had lost his shield Raymond Chia and was forced to face Evelyn directly. He trembled with unease, unable to predict Evelyn Lim's next move. He still didn't know that the blade in Evelyn Lim's hand was aimed directly at his heart. Meanwhile, Sarah's lawsuit was also entering a new phase. Gary Cheong denied all accusations, attempting to portray Sarah as a gold digger who had approached him for money. However, with Sarah's legal team presenting consistent testimonies from past victims and Next-Gen Tech's internal personnel records as evidence, his claims lost all credibility. The trial was increasingly turning in Sarah's favor. Two wars were unfolding on different fronts, yet aimed at a single goal. One was a colossal war to dismantle corrupt corporate power, and the other was an intense battle to reclaim an individual's dignity. And these two wars were destined to converge at a single point, triggering an unprecedented explosion. Evelyn Lim's chessboard was steadily moving towards its final move. Chairman Richard Ong was gripped by extreme anxiety. Losing his shield, Raymond Chia was problematic, but what unnerved him even more was Evelyn Lim's unpredictable attack strategy. She moved like a ghost in the fog, and he never knew where or how she would strike. For Richard Ong, accustomed to reigning as a titan of industry and keeping everything under his control, this uncertainty was an unbearable terror. He began to investigate Evelyn Lim again. Her past, her upbringing, her connections, even her minor habits, he needed to find her weakness and use it as an opportunity for counterattack. After several days of his intelligence team working tirelessly investigating Evelyn Lim's background, they uncovered a fascinating fact. Chairman, there is almost no record of Chairman Evelyn Lim's husband. It's only known that he died in an accident shortly after their marriage, but there is absolutely no specific information. It's as if someone intentionally erased the records. Richard Ong pondered this report for a moment. An accidentally deceased husband. The story felt strangely familiar. He instructed his intelligence team to delve deeper into Evelyn Lim's husband, Kenneth Lim. A few days later, the intelligence team submitted a shocking report to Richard Ong. As he read through the report, Richard Ong's face turned ghastly pale. His hands began to tremble subtly. Evelyn Lim's husband, Kenneth Lim. Over 10 years ago, when Richard Ong had just inherited the management of Summit Holdings, Kenneth Lim was a promising young researcher who had worked alongside him. At that time, Kenneth Lim succeeded in developing groundbreaking new technology, but Richard Ong betrayed him to monopolize the technology. Richard Ong stole Kenneth Lim's technology and scapegoated him for all development failures, forcing him out of the company. Having lost everything, Kenneth Lim, consumed by injustice and despair, made a desperate choice, and his death was disguised as a simple accident. At the time, Kenneth Lim had a young wife he had just married. It was Evelyn Lim. All the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Richard Ong finally understood where Evelyn Lim's relentless attacks originated. This was no mere corporate power struggle or wealth dispute. It was the desperate revenge of a woman who had sharpened her blade for over 10 years against the enemy who had taken her husband's life. Next-Gen Tech and Raymond Chia were all mere pawns in this grand scheme of revenge. Crazy. She was a crazy woman, Richard Ong muttered, terrified. He realized he hadn't just tugged at the tail of a sleeping tiger. He had grabbed the ankle of an avenging spirit he thought was long dead. Evelyn Lim's reason for building Evergreen Capital into the colossal empire it was today, her ruthless and unforgiving management style, all of it had been a preparatory process solely for her revenge against him. Now all of Evelyn Lim's actions made sense. Why she had attacked Raymond Chia first. Raymond Chia had been the minion who had done all the dirty work alongside Richard Ong when he framed Kenneth Lim and stole his technology. Evelyn Lim had been systematically dealing with the accomplices around the main perpetrator, Richard Ong, one by one. The specter of the past tightened around his neck. Richard Ong decided he had nowhere left to retreat. Before Evelyn Lim could expose all the truth to the world, he had to eliminate her first. He began preparing his last stand. He planned to use all his connections and financial resources to socially ostracize Evelyn Lim. He intended to portray her as an immoral and greedy villainess, making all her claims lose credibility. He secretly contacted high-ranking officials in the Attorney General's chambers and the media. Offering vast sums of money and guaranteed futures, he requested a large-scale investigation targeting Evelyn Lim and a media smear campaign. Bring down Evelyn Lim. Fabricate charges that Evergreen Capital accumulated wealth through illegal means. Get her jailed for tax evasion, embezzlement, and stock manipulation. If you succeed, I'll give you whatever you desire. The corrupt authorities accepted his offer. A few days later, the authorities launched a massive raid on Evergreen Capital, and conservative media outlets, as if on cue, began churning out sensational headlines like Chairman Evelyn Lim under investigation for illegal slush funds. The situation seemed to reverse dramatically once more. Evelyn Lim was on the verge of exacting her revenge, but at the same time, she herself stood on the blade of immense power. However, Richard Ong had overlooked something crucial. The current Evelyn Lim was not the vulnerable woman who had lost her husband and cried alone 10 years ago. She had anticipated this entire situation, even Richard Ong's vile counterattack. She had manipulated Richard Ong into digging his own grave. Richard Ong's actions of mobilizing the authorities and the media to attack her now served as yet another perfect piece of evidence to prove his guilt. Everything was moving within the palm of her hand. It was the calm before a colossal storm that would devour everything. Despite the raid by the authorities and the media onslaught, Evelyn remained completely unperturbed. In fact, she wore a satisfied smile as she received a report from Mr. Yoon in her office. Richard Ong has finally made his move. Even more foolishly than I expected. Yes, Chairman. The authorities fell completely for the fake ledgers and fabricated documents we planted. They're probably busy preparing an indictment, believing them to be genuine evidence. Excellent. Since he walked into the trap himself, it's time to lock the door. This was the true nature of the second twist. Evelyn Lim had predicted that Richard Ong would mobilize the authorities and the media to attack her. So she had deliberately created several flaws in the company's accounting ledgers and planted fake baits such as manipulated slush fund lists throughout her office. The corrupt authorities, in collusion with Richard Ong, greedily bit at these baits, believing them to be easy prey, and aggressively pursued a baseless investigation and indictment. Evelyn intended to cleverly use the very process of Richard Ong privatizing the law and public authority to attack her as the most powerful weapon for her own defense. What she truly aimed for was not merely the ruin of Richard Ong as an individual. She intended to bring the entire corrupt cartel of power, which had colluded with him and preyed on Singapore's system, to justice. Evelyn instructed Mr. Yoon, "It's time to reveal everything we've prepared to the world. But we won't reveal it ourselves. We need it to explode in the most dramatic way from the most unexpected place." A few days later, the courtroom where Gary Ching's trial was being held. The trial was already overwhelmingly favoring Sarah. Sarah's legal team had secured numerous pieces of evidence and witnesses to prove Gary Cheung's habitual sexual harassment and workplace bullying. Cornered Gary Ching made a last-ditch effort, claiming it was all a company conspiracy to fire him. At that very moment, an unexpected figure appeared in the witness stand. It was Raymond Chia, the former CEO of NextGen Tech. Having lost everything and being investigated by the authorities, now a shell of his former self, he had finally decided to expose everything out of revenge for being abandoned by Richard Ong and fear of Evelyn Lim. He had made a secret deal with Evergreen Capital to receive a reduced sentence in exchange for becoming a crucial witness. Standing in the witness stand, Raymond Chia, with a trembling voice, began to reveal shocking truths. I knew about Gary Chung's sexual harassment and even condoned it. In fact, I may have even encouraged it. Everyone in the courtroom murmured. At the time, our company was serving as a conduit for managing and laundering Chairman Richard Ong of Summit Holdings slush funds. Then we learned that Evergreen Capital was scrutinizing our company. Chairman Ong said he needed a scandal to divert Chairman Evelyn Lim's attention elsewhere. That's when we found out that Chairman Lim's daughter-in-law worked at our company. Raymond Chia's revelations didn't stop there. He confessed everything he knew, including the accounting fraud, stock manipulation, embezzlement, and illegal lobbying of politicians and legal circles, all committed under Richard Ong's instructions. He also submitted secret ledgers and audio recordings containing this evidence to the authorities. This was no mere sexual harassment trial. The prelude to a massive scandal that would shake Singapore had erupted in the most unexpected place. Raymond Chia's revelations did not end there. He went on to testify about the entire truth of how researcher Kenneth Lim's technology was stolen 10 years ago, leading to his death. He meticulously detailed how he, under Richard Ong's instructions, fabricated evidence and disguised Kenneth Lim's death as an accident. Chairman Evelyn Lim's husband, Mr. Kenneth Lim, did not commit suicide. Chairman Richard Ong might as well have murdered him. I was an accomplice in that entire process. Even in death, I wish to apologize to Mr. Kenneth Lim and his family. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters frantically flashed their cameras, and gasps of shock and outrage burst from the public gallery. It was the moment all the reasons why Evelyn Lim had so tenaciously pursued NextGen Tech, Raymond Chia, and Richard Ong were finally revealed to the world. This was no mere tale of revenge. It was the culmination of one woman's lonely and desperate struggle to uncover the truth of her husband's unjust death and dismantle a massive cartel of evil. Chairman Richard Ong watched this entire scene unfold live on TV from his office. His face was as white as a sheet of paper. The boomerang he had thrown, all the sins he had committed in the past, were now colossal blades piercing his own heart. The money and power he had relied on were crumbling in an instant. All that remained for him was the judgment of the law. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. Raymond Chia's court testimony became a massive black hole engulfing Singaporean society as a whole. The media ran sensational headlines, daily proclaiming the Summit Holdings gate, and public anger soared. The entire nation was shocked that a conglomerate chairman had destroyed a person's life for his own gain, privatized a company to commit all sorts of illegal acts, and even attempted to bribe law enforcement. Richard Ong collapsed. No one remained by his side. The politicians, prosecutors, and journalists who had taken his money and pledged loyalty all turned their backs on him. They now transformed into hyenas, fiercely criticizing Richard Ong to save themselves. Richard Ong was promptly arrested, and the towering empire he had built over decades crumbled like a sandcastle overnight. The special investigative prosecutors who had conducted a baseless investigation into Evelyn Lim were suspended, and they too found themselves under investigation. Their actions clinging to the fake evidence planted by Evelyn Lim became a symbolic event demonstrating how corrupt official power had been serving the privileged. All charges against Evergreen Capital were of course dropped. Evelyn watched this entire spectacle quietly. She did not shout a victor's cheer. Instead, she shed silent tears in her study, where her husband, Kenneth Lim's photograph was placed. The bitter resentment, sorrow, and longing for her husband buried deep in her heart for over 10 years burst forth all at once. The long, arduous journey of revenge was finally over. Beside her were her son Marcus and her daughter-in-law, Sarah. Marcus learned the entire truth about his father's death for the first time. He silently put his arm around his mother's shoulder. He now understood at least a little how heavy a burden his mother had carried alone all these years. Sarah also shed tears. She couldn't believe that what had started with her small misfortune had become the catalyst for uncovering such a monumental truth. She firmly held Evelyn's hand. The two women were now more than just mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. They were comrades who had overcome immense trials together, companions who healed each other's wounds. "Madam, it's all over now, isn't it?" Evelyn dried her tears and smiled faintly at her daughter-in-law. "Yes, darling, it's truly over now." A few days later, the final trial was held. Gary Chung was sentenced to imprisonment and taken into legal custody. He could not avoid a heavy sentence compounded by charges of sexual harassment, workplace bullying, and partial involvement in Raymond Chia's crimes. His wife filed for divorce, and all his assets were seized to cover damages from civil lawsuits. He was completely ruined both socially and personally. As he was dragged out of the courtroom, his expression was blank, as if he still couldn't comprehend why this was happening to him. Raymond Chia received a reduced sentence for confessing all his crimes and cooperating with the investigation, but he too had to pay for his sins with several years in prison. And Richard Ong, he was recorded as the worst criminal in the history of Singaporean conglomerates. Charged with numerous offenses, including embezzlement, breach of trust, stock manipulation, and conspiracy to murder, he received a heavy sentence close to life imprisonment. It was the maximum penalty. Summit Holdings, the empire he had spent a lifetime building, transitioned to a professional management system, and all his family members had to withdraw from executive positions. The titan of an era thus vanished quietly into the annals of history. On the day all judgments were passed, Evelyn visited her husband's grave with Sarah and Marcus. Standing before the cold tombstone, Evelyn remained silent for a long time. She told her husband in her heart that she had finally set everything right and that he could now rest in peace. In the car on the way back, Evelyn asked Sarah, "Darling, what do you want to do next?" Sarah pondered for a moment, then replied in a voice much firmer and calmer than before. "I've learned so much through this experience. I want to help people like me who suffer injustice but can't speak up. I'd like to work at the women's advocacy group you introduced me to. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I think my experience could offer a little strength to someone." Evelyn's face lit up with immense joy at Sarah's answer. Her daughter-in-law had grown into a stronger and more beautiful person through adversity. The revenge was complete, but it was not an act of destruction. It was a process of purification for a new beginning. Where the rotten had been excised, new buds of hope were sprouting. Evelyn Lim's grand symphony of revenge concluded not by merely settling a personal vendetta, but by rectifying societal injustices, healing wounded souls, and ushering in a new future. After all the storms had passed, the world quickly returned to stability. The Summit Holdings Gate became a crucial turning point, severing the deep-seated ties of collusion and corruption prevalent in Singaporean society. Evelyn Lim and Evergreen Capital gained a new image as righteous corporate raiders, and her leadership became even more solidified. However, Evelyn no longer pursued aggressive corporate acquisitions as before. With her husband's revenge, complete further business ventures held little meaning for her. She largely entrusted the company's management to Mr. Yoon and other professional executives, stepping back to dedicate more time to social contribution activities. In particular, she poured her passion into establishing the Kenneth Lim Scholarship Foundation, named after her husband, to support young, talented individuals who refused to give up their dreams despite difficult circumstances. Sarah, true to her word, began a new life at a women's advocacy group, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Drawing on her own experiences, she provided counseling and legal support to victims of workplace, sexual harassment, and bullying. Initially, it was unfamiliar and challenging work, but she found great fulfillment in seeing other victims gain courage and heal their wounds with her help. She was no longer a vulnerable victim trapped by past trauma. She had grown into a strong and warm activist who transformed her own pain into a force for healing others. Her sincere efforts touched many hearts, and she soon became an influential voice in the field. Marcus also actively supported his wife's work. While building a successful career in his own field, he became a strong pillar of support for the new world his wife and mother were creating. The three of them had become a true family, bound by an even stronger sense of unity than before. One weekend afternoon, a small party was held in Evelyn's colonial bungalow garden. 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. Evelyn, Marcus, Sarah, and several women who had received help from Sarah's organization gathered together. They were no longer victims with somber expressions. They were cheerful and bright, having started new lives in their respective fields, supporting each other. One woman approached Sarah, taking her hand. "Sarah, thanks to you, I also found the courage. If I had been alone, I would have carried that pain for the rest of my life. Thank you so much." Another woman approached Evelyn and bowed deeply. "Chairman, without your help, the voices of people like us would never have reached the world. Thank you for giving us a new life." Evelyn clasped their hands, smiling warmly. "I didn't do much. It's thanks to all of you who found the courage to stand up on your own. Let's continue to be each other's strength in the future." Watching them, Marcus put an arm around Sarah's shoulder and whispered, "It feels like you and Mother are changing the world." Sarah smiled, looking at her husband. Under the warm sunlight, laughter filled the garden. No longer were there blades of revenge or shadows of hatred. There was only the warm solidarity of those who had overcome their wounds, healing and hope for the future. Gary Cheong, Raymond Chia, Richard Ong. Their greed had inflicted pain on countless people, yet ironically, their misdeeds had strengthened the victims and forged a bond of solidarity among them. Just as stars shine brighter in the deepest darkness, a more radiant flower of hope blossomed from the profound despair they had created. Evelyn reflected. Life perhaps was like a sea of endless waves. Sometimes, monumental waves threatened to engulf everything, but after they passed, the ground became firmer and new life began to sprout. In the distance, a crimson sun rose above the horizon. It was not yesterday's sunset, but the brilliant dawn of a new tomorrow. Evelyn adjusted her grandson Ethan in her arms and, holding her daughter-in-law's and son's hands, silently gazed at that new horizon. Everything was in its place, and everything was beginning anew. Perfect serenity. Tuk Tradiva, Triok Tradiva.